Good morning. I'm happy to see you again and to welcome you at the fourth press conference organized by the Promo-LEX mission monitoring the presidential elections in Moldova. I will share with you the contents of the monitoring report, but before that, I would nevertheless like to make a few general remarks. First and foremost, the monitoring period included in this report has to do with the findings that were communicated by the long-term observers from the field between 30 September 13th of October. And they have to do with the funding of the election campaign, and that the period concerned is 2nd of October, the 9th of October, 2020. I would like to remind and to thank on this occasion, our partners, our donors, who contribute financially and technically to supporting to the work of the observation mission. That's USAID and also the Soros Foundation Moldova that contribute to the carrying out of this mission via two projects. One is focused on hate speech monitoring, including during the election campaign, and the second aspect has to do with the technical endowment, with equipment of observers that participate in the observation missions, and that is focused on a more detailed and a more thorough observation into the diaspora voting and exercising the right to vote for people living in the Transnistrian region. The Council of Europe that is funding the observation activity, the election observation activity in about 50 polling stations set up abroad. And last but not least important, I would like to thank our colleagues from the European Platform for Democratic Elections, and it is thanks to them that we managed to ensure the simultaneous translation and transmission of these press events in English and in Russian, and sign language translation is also ensured. I would like to highlight again the purpose of the interim reports that are developed by the Promo-LEX Association. Their purpose is, first of all, to inform the citizens, the public opinion, and the stakeholders on the carrying out of the electoral process. The report and the findings we arrived at pursue the goal of preventing problematic situations in the future, and this report is also to be treated as a notification by observers to the attention of electoral bodies so that the latter can respond, especially when it comes to the more problematic matters that we have emphasized or put emphasis on in this report. And now I will cover the key aspects, as I traditionally do, the key aspects that were covered by the interim monitoring report number 4. First of all, there are some of the aspects related to deficiencies in the legal framework, and I must highlight in this regard the fact that from our point of view, the legal framework at this moment in time does not provide one the possibility to participate with equal opportunities in the electoral race, since there are certain administrative aspects that limit the activity of contenders. First of all, it's about the refuse by commercial banks to open the electoral fund account for the candidate Violeta Ivanov that was nominated by Shore political party. In this regard, we must highlight that the legislation is not perfect, as it requires the candidates to use banking accounts for the transactions that they make in order to fund their campaigns. However, the law does not require banks to ensure the opening of such accounts for all stakeholders who are officially registered in the electoral race. For this reason, from our point of view, these legislative provisions need to be reviewed, and I would like to highlight that this was not the only case. In the previous campaigns, there were also isolated cases of this nature where commercial banks refused opening banking accounts, and therefore we found ourselves in a place where the intervention of the parliament is required. The second problematic aspect that needs to be regulated from a legal point of view, and that was highlighted by the Constitutional Court previously when it looked into the recognition of the lawfulness of elections and validation of mandates. So this aspect is about the tacit support by political parties that officially are not registered in the electoral race, but they nevertheless provide support to certain candidates in the electoral race. In this particular case, we mean especially the Socialist Party in Moldova that has practically openly involved in campaigning by its members and supporters in favor of the independent candidate Igor Dodon. And I would like to remind yet again that these are not isolated situations that only happen in this particular election. However, this sort of situations were reported by Promo-LEX observers in previous elections as well, in the 2016 elections when Maya Sandu was supported openly by the DA platform that was in the partial single member constituency elections in Hâncești in 2020, when Grigore Kobza was supported by the National Unity platform party and the DA platform in his endeavors. From our point of view, legislative amendments are required that would cover these sort of situations as well. Otherwise, we are all aware that when political parties get involved in campaigns, they use different administrative, human, technical, logistical resources that are not reported in due fashion in their financial statements, in the financial statements of nominees, of candidates. Another aspect that we analyzed in terms of the legal provisions, the law is not perfect in terms of the suspension from office of the president of the country, and in this regard would like to highlight that according to the opinion of the Venice Commission that was issued back in 2019, the Commission acknowledged as beneficial and compliant with the legal provisions the suspension of the president from office for reasons that can be verified. And it also made reference particularly to healthcare leaves, for instance. And it noted that in this period of time that is possible, and it can an acting person can be set in that position. In our case, it's a different type of leave. The President, Igor Dodon, has mentioned that he went on a leave on his own expense for 35 days, which is the electoral campaign period. However, an acting person was not established in the position of president, probably including because of the imperfect legislative provisions that are in force at this moment in time. With regards to to matters that were previously brought up by us in the previous reports as well. When speaking about the beginning of the election campaign on the same day for all election contenders, in this regard, again, we find ourselves in a place where certain election contenders, at least two, Dorin Kertoaka and Octavian Tsiku, were registered after the official starting of election campaign after the 2nd of October 2020. And therefore, they were or are to a disadvantage compared to other election contenders who on the 2nd of October initiated their election campaign. We are aware that the signature sheets of these contenders or candidates were submitted practically as a last-minute affair in the last days possible. However, I would like to highlight again the fact that, for instance, in terms of examining appeals, the law is very precise, saying that appeals shall be examined including by the day of elections, regarding of the date on which they were filed, if there are facts invoked regarding the election campaign. And therefore, in this regard, I believe it is possible to apply an analogous situation, putting on equal footing, on fair footing, all election contenders. And the last matter that I would like to highlight has, in relation to the legal framework, has to do with the decision of the National Extraordinary Commission on Public Health with regards to amendments to the guidelines on carrying out activity during the electoral period and considering the electoral context. We must underline in this regard and to welcome the decision of the Public Health Commission that mentioned that all voters must carry a mask when they come to the polling station. They need to have a mask. And for those people who will not have a mask with themselves, they will be made available for free a protection mask by the electoral body, so that does not turn out to be an obstacle in exercising one's right to vote. Another situation described in the same decision has to do with the mechanism, with the voting mechanism for voters who have symptoms typical of COVID-19. That is heart temperature, coughing, and so on and so forth. And if such voters turn out to vote until 3 p.m. to the polling station, then they would not be allowed to enter the polling station. However, they would be included on the voters list for voting at their home. And if this category of voters turn up after 3 p.m., the electoral bodies will look into solutions to make sure that they can exercise their right to vote. We cannot fully agree with the decision of the Commission, because even in a situation where a voter or a citizen that has typical symptoms comes to the polling station before 3 p.m., but if they vote in the polling station set up for the voters on the Transnistrian region or abroad, where there aren't this sort of voters lists giving them the possibility to vote at home, which means that they would not be able to cast their vote, and this leads to an uncertain situation. And therefore, we believe that this differentiation before 3 p.m. and after 3 p.m., we believe that it is not quite a good one. The second aspect has to do with the regulation of the mechanism supporting categories of people that are in an isolation regime. And in this regard, the Commission has highlighted that these people will have to file an application to be able to vote at home. And therefore, they would not have to turn out to vote at the polling station. From our point of view, this is a partially good decision, because it requires much broader awareness raising among this category of people. And I would like to remind that At this moment in time, there are more than 40,000 people falling in this category, people who are ill and are in the self-isolation regime or have the status of contacts, and therefore they are not officially allowed to leave their homes. So from our point of view, it's more necessary and it's better to ensure collaboration between health facilities, general practitioners and electoral bodies that would find a way to use the model existing in the hospitals to make available to the electoral bodies a list of such people so that they are ultimately allowed to vote from home. And this needs to be very clearly specified, including when a person is included on a list, be it as a contact or be it a person in self-isolation regime or ill with COVID-19. With regards to the activity of the electoral bodies, I would like to put emphasis on the fact that the Central Electoral Commission has worked in quite a good rhythm, and it adopted about 33 decisions in the last 2 weeks. 42% of all the decisions passed by the Central Electoral Commission have to do with the accreditation of observers. In this regard, I would like to highlight that so far we have quite few observers compared to the previous elections. In the last 2 weeks, only 382 national observers were accredited and 45 international observers. At this moment in time, the Central Electoral Commission has accredited 919 national observers and 121 international observers. That is a little above 1,000 observers in these elections. The second aspect that I wanted to highlight with regards to the activity of the Central Electoral Commission is the adoption of the circular letter 8/3014 of October, where the Central Electoral Commission has reminded both public authorities and election contenders about the need to observe the legislation with regards to organizing campaigns without involving religious denominations, without involving or organizing transportation, voter transportation, that is. And in this regard, it demanded the intervention of law enforcement bodies when such situations occur. From our point of view, the initiative of the Central Electoral Commission is welcome. However, it is imperfect from our point of view, since instead of a circular letter, the Central Electoral Commission was to pass a decision that would have been mandatory to be observed by all stakeholders concerned, be it representatives of the local public authorities, be it representatives of the law enforcement bodies, of local public administration, religious denominations, or election candidates, contenders. Unfortunately, the issuance of the circular letter that apparently could serve rather as a consolidative document for all parties concerned, and there are some consequences to it from our point of view. Although it does not fall in the reporting period, we cannot disregard the events that took place yesterday in Chisinau municipality, where we celebrated the anniversary of Chisinau. And there were situations that were quite delicate that could qualify both as use of administrative resources in the favor of a particular contender, and that concerns the president, Igor Dodon. And the sanitary and epidemiological rules were observed, and these rules are imposed by the specialized bodies. And there's also been open involvement by transfer of image of religious cults or denominations, and the expression of support by religious denominations for a particular candidate. In terms of the ECCs, electoral constituency councils, the observers reported that most of them work in line with the schedule that was established. However, would like to put emphasis on the fact that certain problematic aspects have occurred and that the observers have noticed. They have to do with observing the sanitary and epidemiological rules. According to the observers, 34% of ECCs do not even have special register where they would keep records of people and of other matters related to the sanitary and epidemiological measures taken. In 15% of the electoral constituency councils, they do not take the temperature of people who show up for meetings or who come to the premises where the ECCs are located. And in at least 17% of the ECCs that were visited by the observers, the people where they do not wear protection gloves as they are demanded to, according to the guidelines mentioned previously and that were approved by the Extraordinary Commission on Public Health. We also highlighted that in at least 7 electoral constituency councils, they have different approaches regarding the way, regarding the interpretation of age. Or that issue in terms of an electoral official. We saw situations where certain ECCs have dealt with mandatory decisions where the stakeholders, the delegated people older than 63, these people had to be replaced. And we saw situations where certain electoral constituency councils have accepted the participation as electoral official of people older than 63 on the basis of own accountability statements, and we found situations where these rules were issued as recommendations without being mandatory. So from this point of view, we believe that the intervention of the Central Electoral Commission is required in order to ensure the even consistent interpretation of such rules by all the stakeholders involved in the electoral process. With regards to polling stations activity, we have found that most likely because of the pandemic, we found a decrease in the number of polling stations in schools and kindergartens. For instance, in the 2019 parliamentary elections in schools and kindergartens, there were 47% of polling stations set up. In these elections, only 33% of the polling stations are located in schools and kindergartens. According to observers, the electoral offices of polling stations were set up in most of the cases in due time. However, there is an obvious disproportionate approach in terms of the gender aspect. 83% of the membership of EOPSs are women, and only 17% of their membership are men. Would like to highlight again the problematic issues that were also specified in the previous report number 3 regarding the opening of polling stations for voters in the Transnistrian region. Would like to put emphasis again on the fact that our observers have signaled and flagged several issues that have occurred, that LPAs, voters, citizens from those settlements where the polling stations are to be set up, they are quite stressed out by this situation, and there could even be certain challenges, and there are certain incitements to violence reported, and I think measures need to be taken to take the pressure off this situation. And in this regard, the role of the Central Electoral Commission, of the electoral constituency councils for the Transnistrian region, and law enforcement bodies, in collaboration with the local public administration and the inhabitants of those settlements, they must find consensus to deal with these issues. With regards to the nomination and registration of candidates, we found that there are even fewer files filed compared with the previous election, but also there are fewer candidates compared to the previous election. So there are 13 files filed. Only 9 initiative groups managed to collect the necessary number of signatures, and of the 9 groups, 8 candidates were registered in the race. 4 files, or 4 applications for initiative groups, rather, did not manage to collect the necessary number of signatures, and in this regard, we'd like to highlight that only one single group, the one supporting Obrok, has resubmitted the lists, the signature sheets to the CEC as law provides. 3 initiative groups did not submit back, or during the reporting period did not resubmit the signature sheets that also contain personal data of people who signed in support of particular nominees. In terms of the accuracy of signature of electoral lists, we must pay attention to the fact that the signatures that were regarded null and void and that were removed from the whole calculations have increased. The number of such signatures has increased. In 2016, 12% of the signatures were declared null and void, but in 2020, though, the number of null and void signatures has reached 16%. And the most properly developed signature sheets are the ones that were filled out in support of the current president, Igor Dodon, and only 9% of the signatures were rejected only. And the most incorrect, to put it like that, the most flawed signature sheets from the point of view of the law appear to have been those that were supposed to be in favor of Dorenkirtuak. About 21% of all signatures were disregarded, rejected, and declared null and void. On the same note, we believe that it is worth mentioning another aspect. It has to do with the settlement of litigations. In this regard, we have dealt with a situation where in the last 2 weeks no appeal was filed with the CEC in the last 2 weeks. On the other hand, the Central Electoral Commission has examined 2 solicitations and complaints that it responded to, and it issued 2 solutions with regards to the solicitations that were registered with the CEC back in the beginning of September 2020. So we can see that in at least 2 cases, the CEC took a month to examine, to look into certain aspects related to the electoral process. With regards to litigations in court, we have found that the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Justice have looked in total into 7 appeals. 5 of them were examined by the deadline set up by the law, and 2 of them were examined with certain minor deviations, like a day or 2 beyond the terms provided for in the law. In terms of the voters' register, we noticed that the CEC is trying to be as transparent as possible, and practically on a monthly basis, it has been publishing in this period information from the State Register of Voters. Still, there are certain issues about the register that give rise to concern. So on a monthly basis, there have been fluctuations of 3,000, 4,000 voters. So in August, there was an increase by 4,000 voters compared to July. In September, there's been a decrease by 3,000 voters. So this fluctuation over 4,000 voters is hard to explain considering the very short time span. Likewise, we have also found there's been a continuing decrease in the number of voters that have a domicile and a place of residence on the territory of administrative territorial units where the constitutional authorities have efficient control. And on the other hand, there's been a constant increase in the number of voters who do not have their place of residence there, and the number of voters living in the Transnistrian region has been increasing. These categories represent about 15% of all voters in Moldova, and therefore these people will practically not be included in the main voter lists. There are other aspects regarding the performance of local public authorities. In this regard, we'd like to highlight quite delicate a matter. And this sort of situations have occurred previously as well, but this time it was something bigger. That is about the establishment of the EOPS, and the LPA is supposed to participate in the process, so the LPA is supposed to make some proposals in regards of the membership. 353 bureaus, which represent quite a significant percent of bureaus set up with support from the LPAs. So they were established without people representing the LPAs having been appointed. And unfortunately, 305 bureaus, and that is all the bureaus in Chisinau municipality. In this number of bureaus, the Chisinau Municipality Council did not manage to adopt in due time the decision appointing people as members of the electoral bureaus for polling stations. And these people were appointed on the basis of register of electoral officials. In this regard, we'd like to highlight those matters that we've highlighted before as well, that this register of electoral officials is quite closed. That is, there is some information on people who are really electoral officials, who have actually attended the courses they were supposed to in line with the law enforcement. And it is not known what is the mechanism or what is the modality for selecting and appointing certain people that are listed in the register of electoral officials, and how are they assigned to particular bureaus of electoral polling stations, electoral bureaus for polling stations. So we will move on to the election contenders. We can see that over the last two weeks, the election contenders have become more active, and our observers have reported at least 595 campaigning activities. That is much more than the activities that were carried out in the period before that, in that period when the signatures were being collected. So in terms of the legislative issue regarding support by political parties to an independent candidate. So, according to the observers, 38% of all activities, of all campaign activities carried out by the candidate Igor Dodon, were carried out with the support of representatives of the Socialist Party, of their supporters, or these activities were carried out by using some technical support from the political party. As regards the use of administrative resources, there have been new cases of this nature that can be regarded as use of administrative resources. So in the last 2 weeks, there were 18 such cases. In 13 of them, 13 of them had to do with Igor Dodon, with the candidate Igor Dodon, and Deliu, Usata, Nastasia, and Ivanov and Sandu were concerned in one case each. In most of the cases where administrative resources are used have to do with the involvement of employees from government bodies during their working hours. So in 13 cases out of 18, this was the case, and in the other cases, credit was taken for infrastructure operations, for investments or major accomplishments that occurred thanks to public money. And in all these cases, 5 cases, the credit was taken by the candidate Igor Dodon. There are 5 cases that our observers found, 5 cases that involve the use of the image of a foreign person or state symbols, government symbols in campaigns, and which are prohibited by the law enforcement. And this rule needs to be reviewed because the sanctions are practically not imposed for these violations, and they limit to quite a great extent the freedom of expression. Our observers have reported the first cases of involvement of religious denominations in at least 2 situations. So we have openly observed and noticed the involvement of the Orthodox Church representatives in the campaign supporting the president Igor Dodon, and there were at least 4 potential cases where the representatives of the church have most likely had meetings and discussions with the nominated candidate and voters from the settlements concerned. There were 6 cases that were found by our observers besides the one that I already mentioned, and that concerned the celebration of Chisinau's anniversary. There were other 6 cases where the sanitary and epidemiological rules were violated by candidates. In 3 cases, it was the independent candidate Igor Dodon. In 2 other cases, Maya Sandu was concerned, and in 1 case, Tudor Deliu was concerned. Election contenders, as we noticed, use outdoors advertising, promotional advertising, online advertising, and the observers found more than 554 cases where these were resorted to, and unfortunately there were also situations of intimidation or physical and psychological actions in campaigns, amid campaigns, and the victims were representatives of the election contender Maya Sandu, appointed by Action Solidarity Party. A couple of words about the financing of election campaigns. In this regard, we highlighted the obstacle that Madame Violeta Ivanov, the candidate appointed by Shor Party, the obstacle that she had to deal with, as she was blocked the access to opening a bank account, and alternative solutions need to be found via different in-kind donations so as to be able to organize the campaign. From our point of view, we'd like to reiterate that it is necessary for response measures to be taken, including of legislative nature, that would help settle this issue and that would contribute to ensuring a greater degree of transparency for election campaign funding. There have been a lot of discussions during the previous month regarding the circular letter of the CEC as regards the funding by political parties of the election campaigns of candidates appointed by them. And the observers found in this regard a case of transfer from the Action Solidarity Party, so a transfer of hundreds of thousands of money having been transferred, which were mentioned in the circular letter of the CEC. Still, so far, no decision was made by the CEC with regards to this situation, and we are further to look into this matter in the next week, and we'll see what the decision of the CEC will be on the regards of with regards to this transfer. On the other hand, there were also two other transfers of 90,000 lei from the Liberal Democratic Party, from Dignity and Truth platform, to candidates that they appointed, so within the limit of the 12 salaries per economy. However, they did not report these amounts, these transfers, in the beginning of the election campaign. With regards to unreported expenses, the situation is quite concerning, as none of the election contenders, none of the candidates has reported in their financial statements the work of electioneers, that they're visible things that every voter can see, that are things that are being carried out, performed, and the expenses for this were not reported, nevertheless. So expenses that should have covered 1 week of the campaigning, that is worth more than 800,000 lei. These, for the first week of the campaign, was not reported. Should we look at every contender, then the observers, the candidate noticed that the candidate Igor Dodon, did not report expenses that are expected to amount to more than 400,000 lei. Nastasia, more than 100,000 lei. Madam Violeta Ivanov, expenses estimated at more than 105,000 lei. Madam Maya Sandu, expenses were estimated at more than 67,000 lei. Renato started more than 29,000 lei. And Deliwi estimated expenses more than 20,000 lei. In terms of the hate speech and incitement to discrimination, there are a few issues regarded and found in this regard as well. And observers, Promo-LEX observers, reported at least 22 new cases in the last 2 weeks. And that is 2.6 times more compared to the last weeks of signature collection. Unfortunately, in 41 cases, the authors or the hate speakers, those who have incited to discrimination, are the nominated or the registered candidates. In 32 cases, that was Renato Osate, the candidate Renato Osate, who was a hate speaker and who incited to discrimination, and the speeches of Mr. Nastasia and Tsuku were also concerned in other cases of this nature. There are 14 other cases found by observers where politicians used hate speech and incitement to discrimination against candidates. The victims having been in 6 situations, Madam Maya Sandu, in 4, Igor Dodon, in 2 other cases, Renato Osate and Kirtuak and Tsuku, in 1 situation each. And there were 7 cases where hate speech was directed against members of political parties that nominated candidates in the presidential election. The key criteria for applying hate speech and discrimination focused on political affiliation, disability, gender, religion, sexual orientation, or expression of opinion. And the worst side of it is that when hate speech is used on TV, where there is a host of a TV show and that can and should respond to that, we have found no prompt reaction by TV hosts, TV anchors, when hate speech was resorted to. And a couple of words about civic education. As mentioned in the previous reports, the Promo-LEX Association is carrying out the awareness-raising campaign, a political awareness-raising campaign for voters in Moldova under the slogan "I Vote." And the target group of the awareness-raising campaign consists of young voters, voters from the Transnistrian region, and voters abroad. So in total, Promo-LEX Association and the partners and our partners carried out more than 59 activities, and most of them were carried out online. Today, in fact, Promo-LEX Association has launched a motivational spot focused on civic education and targeting the young as a target group. And hopefully this way we will manage to contribute to encouraging young people from Moldova to be aware, to become aware of the importance of an informed vote and to go out to vote. We must also mention that the CEC and the Central for Ongoing Training in the electoral area have scaled up their activities both in terms of awareness raising, of information and training of electoral officials, and not only electoral officials. There were trainings also conducted for representatives of the police, of law enforcement bodies, and for judges who will examine electoral litigations. So these were the key findings. The key findings that appeared in the fourth monitoring report. If there are any clarification questions with regards to the information that was presented now or in the report, then I would be happy to try to answer the questions. If there aren't any questions, then I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the presentation of the last campaign report that will be presented not on Thursday but on Friday, before the weekend on which the presidential election is to take place. On that occasion, we will talk about the last 2 weeks of campaign, and we will introduce you to the last findings arrived at in the 2 last weeks of the election campaign, and we will traditionally meet you at the campaign headquarters of the Promo-LEX observation mission at 10:30. Thank you for your attention. Have a good day and stay in good health. I wish good health to all those who are in this room and who are watching us and will continue to watch us. Thank you.